Името на вторият ми гост е Артур Пол Масаро III, старши политически съветник на Хелзинската комисия на САЩ. Това е двупартийна структура в Конгреса. Комисията за сигурност и сътрудничество в Европа е другото име. Там работата му покрива сектори като противодействие на корупцията, България, човешки права, България, санкции, България, незаконно финансиране и енергийна сигурност. И това е тема, която засяга България. В разговора ще ни помага с превода Сабрина Хил, обичайният заподозрян за такава отговорна дейност. Пол е тук по покана на Центъра за изследване на демокрацията, като взе участие в няколко прояви, които са посветени на корупцията, използването и като инструмент пропаганда и хибридно въздействие. And now I turn to English and I say welcome to Paul Massaro.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, you have to, anybody who is on Twitter knows the name Paul Massaro. He's probably one of the best-known names when it comes to U.S. policy, Ukraine. So, lucky to welcome you to Sofia, the issue of corruption and more specifically, its endemic nature. Is a hot topic or traditional topic in Bulgaria. Yet Bulgarian voters, we are ahead of elections, don't seem to understand the full impact that it has on Bulgarian politics. And still, the parties of corruption are having a good representation in parliament. So, corruption is also Russia's best export commodity. Nothing better. I mean, the rest doesn't work, but corruption works because it relies on human nature, human failures of human nature, rather. So, to begin with, what did you hear in Bulgaria during your trip? And what did met your expectations, what you expected to see and hear here, and what didn't?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's very exciting to be in Bulgaria. This is my first time in Bulgaria. It's something, I've long wanted to do, wanted to take a trip here, and now I finally have. I came to participate in Center for the Study of Democracy's conference. It was anti-corruption in national security. The Bulgarian president spoke. It was very exciting. I got to shake his hand. So, I mean, I didn't expect to meet the president, but
so the Bulgarian president shook the hand of the next U.S. president.
Well, that would be quite nice if true. I don't know if my ambitions aim that high yet, but perhaps one day. Well, look, I mean, it was a great conference. I've known the Center for the Study of Democracy for some time now, for many years. They have been very impactful in Washington. They come over and they have a number of conferences on Russia's sort of foreign policy. I think many people know of the Kremlin Playbook and the Kremlin Playbook 2, both very influential in the DC context. So it's very exciting to come. I mean, I think that, I've met with some amazing experts. I've really enjoyed Sofia. I went out to Varna. I met with a lot of Ukrainian refugees.
Close to the war.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is, right? And some of those that have been forced to flee.
Yeah.
So I've been able to kind of, I think, get a really strong first-hand experience of what's going on here. So, I mean, I guess I've been surprised both by, well, I guess not so much surprised, but, I really enjoyed interacting with some of the great Bulgarian experts who seem very clear-eyed and understand what's happening. A little surprised by what I guess I would perceive as a slight Russia friendliness, I suppose. The Russian disinformation seems to have found purchase in corners of Bulgarian political culture. And I think that that's something that, I really want to understand better. And I think that, it's very worth my coming here so that I can report back on that and we can, see what can be done.
Well, true. Russian influence is still gaining some ground, but it's most legacy. Anyhow, so let's move to U.S. politics. Secretary of State Blinken announced a few days ago that the United States is just about in the next week or very soon to announce a strategic document on its policy in the Black Sea region with economic and political dimensions. So that would be essential. Also, we assume that it would be in the context of nature policy as well. I don't believe that it would be just a bilateral thing. But no doubt the war in Ukraine implies also a larger focus on the area of Black Sea, because it's one of the epicenters of global politics. So what do you believe that this strategic document would help both Ukraine and the US to streamline our policy and resources and goals, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some sense to call it one of the epicenters is an understatement. It is the epicenter. I mean, the way we view this, Russia's invasion is the most important thing to happen in the world since World War II, right? I mean, this is an attempt to overturn essentially the post-war consensus, post-war institutions, to overturn, in a sense, democracy writ large. I think that many of us don't appreciate how close we came to a wider conflict, pretty much only prevented by the Ukrainians, surprising all of us in fighting back and resisting this imperial Russian invasion. So this Black Sea document is overdue. It's something, we've been requesting for a long time. It's not just this administration, of course. It's many administrations worth of little thinking and little strategy toward the region. I think it's been deprioritized for a long time, much to our detriment. And in one sense, it was because we were focused on other things, and in other sense, it was also the purposeful influence of saying, no, we got this. This is kind of Russia's region, and Russia will be the security provider, and so on and so forth. We deluded ourselves into believing that this might be the case, and it obviously is not. In fact, Russia is the great spoiler for the region and indeed the world.
So, Brad, I work I've been working on Russia since my ambassadorship almost 20 years ago, and doing some analysis. And one of those recent pieces that I wrote was on exactly on the role of Ukraine in West's overall policy. There are many inconsistencies, I would assume. And for example, no one wants to imagine that Ukraine would lose the war, because actually the consequence, just the apprehension of that, are so profound, are so deep that nobody first would be able to grasp the consequences, then to mitigate them. Then we want to preserve NATO's unity, and that was one of the reasons put forward for going slowly, one step ahead, two back, two step ahead, one back. But war has its own logic and urgency. How do you fit this, both lines of Western policies? Because ultimately, everybody agrees that peace talks at the moment are impossible. Things are decided on the military front, on the war front. So,
completely impossible. I mean, any sort of peace talks or ceasefire, and it's not because of an unwillingness on the Ukrainian side to have them. Obviously, Ukraine is happy to have peace talks once Russia leaves Ukraine, and that is the basis for any kind of discussion about the end of the war. Is Russia will have to leave Ukraine. Look, I mean, we're in a new paradigm since February 24th, 2022, right? I mean, we have to recognize that what we've been doing for the last 30 years has failed. The kind of overarching priority of economic integration and the triumphal march of democracy that was going to follow economic integration with Russia and China has failed. And it's okay to...
You believe China is in the same situation as Russia?
I wouldn't call it the same situation, but I call it the same camp, yes. I mean, Xi was just in Russia. And I mean, I view them as very much allies. I
would slightly disagree.
Okay.
China has something to lose, a lot to lose economic-wise. Russia is simply a gas station, as someone said. And still, that's why even President Xi, I would ask you again on President Xi's visit to Russia, where they sort of send the message to the world that they are in one and the same camp. But when you look into the fine print, China still has its own consideration. And the Prime Minister actually, just the other day, said that relations and trade are far too important for China.
Well, but I also want to recognize that while Russia is brutal and uses terrorist tactics, and terror is the method of its military to try to get to a conclusion, right? Russia is not irrational, okay? We signaled to Russia that we would tolerate an invasion of Ukraine. We tolerated Georgia. We tolerated Georgia. We tolerated Syria.
Yeah.
We tolerated the first invasion of Ukraine. We tolerated the early crackdowns in Chechnya. We've tolerated enormous amounts of malfeasance from Russia. You mentioned corruption at the top. We've tolerated Russian corruption. We've encouraged Russian corruption, if anything, coming into our societies. We've encouraged abuse of Interpol. We've tolerated assassinations. I mean, I could do this all day, right? I mean, so when Putin looked at the invasion of Ukraine, he was thinking, they're going to tolerate this. You know, I'm going to invade. I'm going to take it over, and they're going to tolerate it.
More of the same.
More of the same. And then Xi, I think, you know, was going to go and invade Taiwan once the successful invasion of Ukraine had concluded. And I mean, in a very real way, Ukraine shook us and said, wake up, you know? I mean, and it's incredible, the mulligan we got because of the bravery, the valor of the Ukrainian people.
Super. And now, again, the strategy that we have is step ahead, two back. And we are, how to say, very painfully expanding the limits of the arms and the support that we may deliver or can deliver, or would agree to deliver to Ukraine. Initially, there was no talk about airplanes, no talk about long-range missiles. And now they're coming as a natural need, because otherwise you could always sustain the conflict, but you would freeze the conflict instead of resolve the conflict. And that plays into Kremlin's hand. It's
a victory for Russia. That's a Russian victory scenario.
Exactly.
Okay. And I mean, look, we should have given all of this before the war, right? That would have deterred the war if Ukraine had been armed to the teeth. Now, okay, we didn't do that. Yeah. Then we should have given it all right after the invasion. Okay, we didn't do that. You know, you're exactly right. We've had to, you know, fits and starts, kicking and screaming into every new capability. Right? I mean, it's a very frustrating approach. I'm frustrated by it. I think a lot of people are frustrated, but nobody more than the Ukrainians, because, you know, I mean, they just want to win, you know, and liberate their country. The one thing I will say, and it's not really in defense, it's an explanation, it's not a justification, is that we are coming out of 30 years of illusions.
Exactly.
We're coming out of 30 years of eating up lies about what Russia is. It's like coming out of 30 years of sleep.
Before Pearl Harbor, it's just the dream of peaceful adjustments that we can avoid war, stuff like that. But actually, we're at war. And the funny thing also is, it's not a funny, actually, it's a very serious thing. How do we fit Ukraine into today's world and tomorrow's world? Because Ukraine now are the most combat-ready army in Europe. And it's a strange thing when NATO hesitates to formalize its relations with Ukraine and consider it as the outpost of forward defense of NATO. And it's strange because if we lose Ukraine, then we'll have to spend a lot more in defense. Yeah. And the result is, you never know.
Yeah. I mean, there have been some silly complaints from certain corners about the cost of helping Ukraine. In fact, the cost of helping Ukraine is extremely small.
That's the best investment in defense you can imagine.
It's amazing. I mean, it's the best foreign policy investment that the United States has ever made in the history of the Republic. I mean, it's basically nothing for the return. I mean, it's unbelievable. Look, whether Ukraine is in NATO or not, and I think Ukraine should join NATO, you know, after the war. Once it's won.
It's more essential to integrate it.
It's more essential to integrate. It's basically join NATO in all but name.
Exactly.
And I mean, I personally believe, and again, this is all hypothetical because we have no idea what's going to happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years. Has, yeah. But once victory has been achieved, I think there's going to be something of what I've called the Israelization of Ukraine, where Ukraine basically has to have a big military, has to have a lot of anti-air, has to be ready for an isolated, belligerent Russia, still under Putin for who knows how long.
But it should be a shared effort.
It should be a shared effort, that's right.
Not Ukraine's own, because it would be crippled. It's crippled as an economy, it's destroyed, so on its own, its economy cannot sustain.
Well, that's exactly right, and Ukraine has to be, at that point, integrated into, you know, Euro-Atlantic economic structures, EU, so on and so forth. And I think we'll want that. I mean, look at what Ukraine offers. I mean, this country that had for the longest time, because of Russian narratives and Russian propaganda, been painted at this, you know, corrupt backwater, is in fact like this bastion of creativity and freedom and democracy. I mean, it's just been amazing, I think, for most of the world to get to know the Ukrainian people for who they really are. It's extraordinary. And I mean, they've brought the whole world to look at this region even. I mean, you know, Poland even, the Baltic states, you know, these countries weren't thought of in the popular imagination in the United States for a long time. And now we see them, we're like, where were you our whole life? You know, this is amazing.
And also a very interesting thing that Ukraine was known for corruption before the war. Mm-hmm. Now, corruption at the moment, because largely of the war and Russia's influence leaving Ukraine, Medvedchuk and everybody can think of. So corruption is no more such an immediate and hurting issue for Ukraine.
Well, they've had to clean up the ship, yeah.
Exactly.
And I mean, it's really, what you point out is really important, that, I mean, you know, there's homegrown corruption you got to fight, but the homegrown corruption is exacerbated by Russia.
Exactly.
And Russia wants to take advantage of all that.
Okay, let's move to your home base in the United States. There are lots of people, but particularly in Russia, who cherry-picking certain facts of U.S. politics. For example, I remember when Donald Trump came to power, all the Russophile movements were encouraged, and they started supporting openly Donald Trump because they believed he would help their cause. Now, even one of the leading GOP candidates, DeSantis, he was quoted just the other day that he's questioning whether it's in the national interest of the United States to extend further military support for Ukraine. Now, I'm sure there is still a very strong bipartisan support in Congress and elsewhere, but the election campaign always gives ground to lots of speculations, and this is exactly what's happening. Today, or rather yesterday, in the very influential The Atlantic magazine, there is a guy called Mario Loyola. He's a defense advisor. I picked it from the Russian media. I mean, because they instantly pick anything that comes
up. Yeah,
and he's writing, and he just quoted DeSantis as another case where the U.S. should reconsider its strategy towards Ukraine and just pull back.
Yeah. So I'll say this. I'll say that, you know, candidates say what they say on the campaign trail. The support for Ukraine in the United States has been remarkably consistent and big. I mean, both parties, Republicans and Democrats, both in Congress, and then there was a recent Gallup poll outside of Congress. 62% of registered Republicans and 58% of registered Democrats. I mean, 62% of registered Republicans, 58% of registered Democrats view Russia's invasion as a critical threat to the United States, okay? The second, after that, they say it's an important threat, the rest of them. So it's not even just, I mean, 62 and 58 critical threat. You know, I mean, that's not support for you. I mean, support for Ukraine is even greater than that in a sense, but I mean, critical threat. You know, I think that this is, when I look at this, and I mean, of course, I'm taken by, this is the most American thing in the world to support Ukraine. I mean, this is a freedom. This is a struggling democracy being invaded by a brutal tyrant. You know, and that's the moral reason, and the moral stuff really moves me. Now, let's say you're hard cold, you know, you're not moved by moral things. Well, in that case, that's what we talked about. It's the best national security investment we've ever made. This is preventing a world war in which American troops, of course, according to our treaty obligations, would have to fight, right? And because of the Ukrainians, we don't have to fight. We just have to spend a little. We have to write a little check, and the Ukrainians take care of it. You know, so I mean, it's an amazing thing that's going on in Ukraine right now. And there's no wonder that American support has been so large and so consistent.
I couldn't agree more. I actually saw, before I came here, I saw a very impressive address of Italian Prime Minister. Remember, Italian Prime Minister Meloni is with Salvini and Berlusconi. I wish everybody could look into her passionate speech in front of the Italian parliament in defense of Ukraine. That is Italy. That is Berlusconi. This is all aside. Everybody is now for Ukraine. And thank you because that is a contentious issue here, and a lot of people speculate with the likelihood of either candidates of the GOP, either Trump or DeSantis, changing again, gaining the seat in the White House, and then changing U.S. foreign policy. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Finally, I would like to ask you one more question. It's pertaining to what you perceive, because part of the strategy that Secretary Blinken has announced would also accommodate U.S. policy towards Bulgaria. Bulgaria is an important part of the Black Sea region. It was overlooked in the past by U.S. policy. There are so many sides that you can judge. For example, the easiest thing when you see the level of the diplomatic representation. In the old days, immediately after the Cold War, the level of presentation was just top-notch diplomats, stuff like that. But now it's becoming more and more important, and we're expecting the new U.S. ambassador. So what do you think would change as part of this overall strategy or policy, or not necessarily change, be amplified as a sort of...
Toward Bulgaria?
Yes, because Bulgaria is, you see, one of the problems in Bulgaria is corruption. Mm-hmm. And corruption means Russian influence. Russian influence, but instead of being an asset for NATO, we are compromised assets, or let's not fully materialize that.
Well, I want to say, the new chairman of the commission is Representative Joe Wilson of South Carolina, mm-hmm. And he is the co-chair of the Bulgaria caucus in the House of Representatives, which is essentially the all-parliamentary group.
He made an impressive statement on Bulgaria.
That's right. I mean, he loves Bulgaria. We love Bulgaria. You know, I mean, I think that sometimes there is a feeling that perhaps Bulgaria isn't getting enough attention, but I'll tell you, I mean, in Congress, you know, we love Bulgaria, and this, you know, representative, I mean, Joe Wilson is, of course, you know, the people's representative, you know, I mean, he's a very, you know, typical and wonderful American politician, and he's thinking about Bulgaria, you know, all the time. So I would say, you know, we absolutely view Bulgaria as a critical part of this coalition for Ukrainian victory. We appreciate the Bulgarian, obviously the Ukrainians appreciate, but Bulgaria has been active providing security assistance. And then, of course, you know, Bulgaria is the one supplier for these Soviet-era munitions that are so critical to Ukrainian defense. So Bulgaria is a humongous part of this. Obviously, I'd mentioned at the top, you know, yeah, I mean, there is it feels like an entrance, a vector for Russian influence and disinformation via corruption and, you know, via some of the manipulation of history that Russia tries to take advantage of. But
they're also holding back potential for military support, for providing ammunition to Ukraine, because our capacity is just second to none in terms of Soviet-type ammunition.
That's right, and obviously, you know, we'd hope to see that. I mean, we should all want to expedite Ukrainian victory. We should all want Ukrainian victory as quickly as possible. That's the only way to end this war permanently. It's in Bulgaria's interest, and I guess that's the big thing. Is you know, we want Bulgaria to follow its national interest. You know, in Bulgaria's national interest, I mean, from what I can see, from what I can tell, having spent here and talked with a lot of Bulgarian experts, is the rapid end to the war in Ukraine, to Russia's invasion, right? Because this whole thing sets this whole region ablaze, right? I mean, it's no good. And again, if Russia's successful, if Russia's able to achieve its vision, I mean, there will be a broader conflict, right?
May I speculate on the forthcoming of this new strategic document? The downing of the drone over the Black Sea in international space demonstrated beyond any doubt that NATO's presence in the Black Sea is limited, and there's a handicap. And when you actually allow Russia to consider the Black Sea as its own domestic sea, then there's a problem, because that is exactly all the areas, apart from Donbass and Lugansk, what Russia has been striving all along is to control the bridge between the continental part and Crimea. Therefore, actually, Ukraine doesn't have access to the Azov Sea. So how do we as NATO resolve this?
The only way any of this can be resolved is via Ukrainian victory. I mean, so long, if Russia achieves its vision, you know, everyone's in danger. Bulgaria's in danger. Romania's in danger. I mean, this is, you know, this is why we're in such a tough position here. You know, Russia's vision for regional hegemony, dominance, you know, an incursion into NATO, that's made possible with the land corridor control of Crimea, and of course they have not given up on their vision yet for total control of Ukraine.
Yeah, well, the good thing is that reports from the war front, and particularly for Bakhmut, are giving us some confidence that the counteroffensive of the Ukrainian army is just ahead in spring, inshallah, as the Arabs say. So, and finally, I do believe that the conferences that you have attended have given you some new focus, or have enriched you with the opinion of Bulgarian. We have good analysts, and actually, one of the things that I've also preached, unfortunately, few people listen, that if you want to read Russia best, you have to listen to the people in Eastern Europe. Because we have the experience. That's why we also criticized Chancellor Merkel for Nord Stream. Yet, if we look at the U.S. criticism towards the Turk Stream, all the effort went into criticizing Nord Stream or trying to prevent the Nord Stream 2 from happening. Yet, with regard to the Turk Stream, which bypassed Ukraine and actually was more successful than Nord Stream, the U.S. policy was somehow lenient or lukewarm. It never, even the Ukrainians didn't express outright criticism. Yet, at the moment, Russian gas is flowing through Turk Stream in volumes that are planned. And the funny thing that we allowed it and funded this, yet we don't receive gas, so that we are put under extreme conditions of a power cutoff. And so, how the energy, when you diffuse energy weapon, you have to replace energy with something. At the moment, we see attempts to speed up climate change and therefore give away fossil fuels, yet before you have something to substitute them. So how this climate energy issues fit into the foreign policy and the geopolitics of working with Russia?
Russia's energy weapon is mixed with its corruption weapon, right? I mean, it's always been the same thing. They know that these energy projects are not good for the countries that engage in them. They know they make them overly dependent. They essentially get agreement to them by co-opting certain elites and officials. We saw this in Germany, the Nord Stream 2 case. We saw it all over the place in various Russian energy projects. I mean, look, we never, you know, we want countries to make their own decisions. Right?
Yeah, sure.
We don't want to, you know, we want to be good allies. We're all allies, though, you know, so we want to be honest with one another too.
Germany is no less important than allied for U.S. Yes, you passed a critical judgment on Nord Stream 3. You never passed a critical judgment on Turk Stream.
Yeah, I mean, only too late, though, right? I mean, and it was all done sort of, it was done congressionally, and ultimately the congressional the law was
Congress was active, yes.
You know,
exactly,
but the administration actually ended up, you know, using a national security exemption to not apply those sanctions. So I mean, it's, you know, look, there's been an extreme hesitancy to take hard action against these things precisely because, you know, and maybe we should have, you know.
It's appeasement, and Ukraine, and it hasn't worked, and you have the
it hasn't worked, but we also want our allies. You know, we want Germany to recognize that this is a bad decision. We want Bulgaria to recognize it's a bad decision. We want them to make the decisions because it's their country. You know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
you know, and so we come on TV shows and we talk about it and we talk, you know, but at the end of the day, I think Bulgaria has to recognize and others have to recognize that it is not in the Bulgarian national interest to be so dependent upon Russia and to, you know, open up to Russian money and energy.
Fine. Question of laundering money. And laundering money, in the old days, the guys' corruption money have to be parked, end up somewhere. In the old days, it was oligarchs parked their money in the city of London.
Yeah.
Then they tried to move to China and to their special zones, economic zones, to Singapore. And finally, they ended up in the Gulf. Now, we read yesterday that the European Commission has included the United Arab Emirates, one of those places where they park their money. Do you believe that the Gulf states, because it's now there's some sort of change, a very important geopolitical stuff going on with the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran and the Gulf states, etc., that ultimately that these guys who actually Russian money plus corrupted money end up in the Gulf would finally be used in order to restore Ukraine or to fight back corruption and Russian influence?
Well, I guess first things first. A lot of their money is already frozen in the West. They didn't get away with all of it, right?
Yeah,
their first destination for all their money has always been the West. I mean, London, Paris, New York City, you know, L.A., Miami,
Delaware.
You know, I mean, well, right, through Delaware shell companies, South Dakota anonymous trusts, all that kind of thing, right? I mean, it was always, you know, steal in Russia, spend in the West, right? I mean, it was
enjoy life in the West.
That's right, and here's the kicker: we got a lot of money, and we did pass last Congress. We passed a law that will allow, you know, forfeited oligarch assets to be given to Ukraine, and already we've seen the first 5.4 million from the oligarch Malafeyev. 5.4 million forfeited, going to be provided to Ukraine. We're going to see more of this. Now we're talking about Russian sovereign reserves as well, which are, you know, the reserve currency in central banks. There's about 300 billion of that. And we could take that. So I just want to...
But few of that has been identified. I mean, this is a ballpark figure.
Well, it's based on actually Russian central bank estimates, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's around there. So it's a lot of money. Now, I just want to say so we should take that and give it to Ukraine. I want to say one other thing about the Russians, you know, fleeing to Dubai, right? I mean, it's, you know, it's a second best for them. You know, they don't want to be in Dubai. They want to be in London. You know, they want to send their kids to Stanford. They want to send their kids to Harvard. You know, I mean, stealing all this money is about taking it all, then laundering your reputation and being universally respected as a philanthropist. You know, have your name on an Oxford School of Government.
Yeah, sure.
Have your name on museums. That's all gone now. These people are criminals. I mean, they're like the fact that they have to be over there is an indication that the sanctions are essentially working. We've chased them out. You know, and I mean, it's not a happy place over there.
Sure. And it's very, very hot. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Thank you for joining us with Alternativata. We are independent. We're financed by readers and viewers, etc. So that's the only way in which we can survive. Thank you very much, and hope to see you more. And Congressman Wilson also, because he's a very important guy. We listen to what he says.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much.